And welcome again to another edition of the Twins Wrap with the television voice of the Minnesota Twins, Dick Bremer. I am Derek Hanson. And, well, Dick, I don't know what more to say. It's it seems like we're going through this over and over again. It's really aggravating, isn't it?
Well, it is, I think, for baseball fans and just about everybody associated with the game, because it's clearly in everyone's best interest to get the games on the field and on TV and on the radio and all of that as soon as possible. But we're not there yet. I think we'll get there. We're just not there yet. And there's just such a pent-up eagerness, appetite, if you will, to watch baseball and the other sports. And if baseball's not careful, the tide's going to turn. And we all know what can happen if you end up with disenfranchised fans. Sometimes it takes them a while to warm to your sport again. So there is some urgency, and I suspect, we've said this before, but I suspect next week when we talk, we might have a deal done.
4th of July, is that realistic now? I mean, that's going to be awfully tough to get that together, but that would have just been a perfect start to it, in my opinion.
Yeah. The 4th of July is on a Saturday, and I guess I was imagining a world where there'd be the big reveal, if you will, of the 2020 baseball season, the opening day on Friday the 3rd, and then you would just go on and play your 81, 82 games, whatever. If they were to get a deal done this week, and it seems unlikely at this point, but if they were to do that, and they would need 3 weeks to put together, training camps, you're right up against, the 3rd of July. I think there's an outside chance that they still could be playing on the 4th of July weekend. And I guess that's maybe the most discouraging thing for me, is just a tremendous opportunity to make a big splash and win back a lot of baseball fans. And they haven't been able to put the deal together yet that would get them on the field for 4th of July weekend.
Yeah, hopefully they can do that, because I think that would just be a key psychological thing. Because, you and I talked about this last week. I think the longer they go, the worst thing that you can have right now is out of sight, out of mind, especially when the other sports are planning on playing. And, the NFL, they're lucky as you know what. They look like they're right on par here to keep going. And the more you go into August or whatever, they might start to forget about you, and you do not want that to happen.
No, you've got an opportunity here with the NBA and the NHL resuming at the end of July. And if you could, from a marketing standpoint, you've got a great opportunity to, jump ahead of the other sports in terms of, having your big opening day and have weeks literally to yourself in terms of, the sports attention span. And we'll see what happens. I suspect that, as Dave St. Peter was quoted as saying in the Star Tribune last week, that they might be closer than most people realize. I certainly hope that's the case.
We'll get back to that in just a little bit in the next segment probably, but I do want to ask you a little bit, since we talked, kind of a downer for you. It sounds like they may not want people like you and Bert and the radio guys to maybe go on the road. How do you feel about that? They want the broadcasters maybe to do it remotely.
Yeah, we've been told that while we would be a target field for the home games, we would be deemed non-essential personnel for road games, and we would be in the studio. Actually, I got confirmed yesterday under the current plans, we would actually, as odd as this may sound, we would be at Target Field while the Twins were, say, at Busch Stadium in St. Louis, working off monitors and doing the best we can to, backfill the telecast with, what we're seeing on the screen. It's not ideal. It's not optimum, but what has been ideal, optimum, and normal about anything in 2020 this year. So in a sense, it would just kind of fit in with everything that's happened so far this year.
As far as Target Field, you mentioned, how is everything around there? I mean, a lot of what took place was not necessarily right in front of there, but not too far adjacent-wise was a lot of the protests and unfortunately some of the looting and all that. I mean, just down the road, it did a lot of downtown pretty much go unscathed around that area.
Well, around the ballpark, I haven't heard of any damage by the rioting and looting that took place. As you know, the Twins Target Field is a fairly secure perimeter, and so thankfully there hasn't been any damage done to the ballpark. So we would assume that in the event they do get a deal done, that half the games will be played at Target Field, and there won't be many people in the ballpark. But luckily, I guess I would be one of them.
It's going to be a little odd, I'm sure, right? It kind of goes back to the old days of the old fake crack of the back and reading the ticker, right? And that's what the old radio broadcast used to do.
Yeah, I like most play-by-play guys, I think my value on a telecast is not being there at 7:00 when the game's being played, but being there at 3:00 and having a chance to talk to Mitch Garver about an at bat or two that he had the night before, or whether he had ever caught this pitcher that the Twins are going to run out there that night in spring training. Backstory type stuff that we can include into the telecast. Well, that's probably not going to be available to us. So it'll be a unique situation. Our job, is going to be to make the telecast as interesting as possible. It's just the toolbox that we've normally been able to carry to work every day isn't going to be very full in terms of being able to have access to the people who the viewers want to hear from.
Another unfortunate thing about it for you personally, too, is many times whenever I go to the ball game, you like to walk the concourse, talk to some of the fans, kind of get a feel for the day. I mean, that is going to be really, I'm sure, tough for you this year, too, in 2020.
There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be very uncomfortable for the players, the coaches, the managers. Everybody's got to be flexible. I'll have no problem being flexible. But, over the years, I've grown pretty comfortable in terms of my game prep because, I'd like to think I'm pretty thorough and go about my business and bring to the telecast some things that are of interest to the fans. And I'll still have that task. I'll just have to find apparently a different way to get it done.
Yeah, it's certainly strange, that is for sure. Getting back to the negotiations, and you and I mentioned last week the sausage making is always ugly. And I don't want to put you in between a rock and a hard place here because you have to deal with players and, the management all the time. But is there a concerning thought? Because I can't really believe, just knowing a little bit of how Dave St. Peter and the Pohlads run, that they would really want this. But would there be a segment of the owners out there that maybe just don't want a season? Because if they're coming at 75% of the prorated salary, knowing that the players wanted 100, I mean, is there a group of owners, do you think, that maybe just don't want a season because they won't make back what their expenses would be?
Well, that's what their claim is, that under the restrictions that we will all be under, where there won't be any ticket revenue, and because of that, playing the games will actually be a loss for them. Players, of course, don't believe that. There's, the mistrust that's existed for decades between the two parties. But I don't think any owner wants to scrap the season entirely. They've got a mechanism in place, something that was agreed upon back in March, that the commissioner could issue an edict of a 50-game season, regular season, and then expanded playoffs. And that is the baseline, I believe, for where we're at right now. There will be 50 regular season games. And I think all the owners are on board with that. I think there's, in a period of disunity, I think the owners are unified on that front, that there will be a season, there will be a postseason. Their concern, one of many, is to get all of it completed before the anticipated second wave of COVID-19.
Interesting there, too, because you mentioned if you're doing a 50-game season, let's say you start in July, I mean, that means you'd probably, and this has been argued, I think, for a lot of baseball fans for a while, because in September with the start of the NFL and college football, sometimes are forgotten. I mean, you're talking a pretty expanded playoff then, right? I mean, you're going to start pretty early with the playoffs.
They're talking about 16 of the 30 teams would be in the postseason, which would suggest to me that there are going to be some teams with losing records that are going to be in the playoffs. And it's just going to be unusual. I mean, somebody's going to be, if everything is played out, someone's going to be a World Series champion, and it could be the Minnesota Twins. But it's going to be a very peculiar regular season. It's going to be an unusual postseason. And the frustrating thing, I think, for a lot of baseball fans, much of this has been out of anyone's control. But now you're in a situation where, thankfully, the COVID-19 virus, some of the analytics are a little encouraging now in terms of being able to conduct life somewhat at a normal pace, and having games played, albeit without fans. And now the hang up is something that is controllable. It's something that human beings should be able to figure out when much of this country has been gripped in a situation that has been beyond anyone's control.
Yeah. There's no question. That's the aggravating part about that for sure, is just that with the way, and you got to wonder if some of the research is, I mentioned yesterday that the World Health Organization talked about, it may be rare that asymptomatic people are going to pass it. So that could be a positive. I mean, who knows what we're going to find out in a month or so. So hopefully they can get something done because, if we can get back to some normalcy, you certainly want to be ahead of the eight ball here.
Yeah. And here we're anticipating a second wave months down the road, when this virus has been unpredictable, 1 week out in terms of what the numbers are going to be. The curve has been flattened pretty much across the country. And so we're in a better spot, it appears, than we were, just a few weeks ago. But if, your parent or grandparent has been diagnosed with the virus, that's not much consolation for you. So, we've got an opportunity here to really provide some entertainment to a nation that has been deprived of it for months now. And it's incumbent upon the players and the owners to give whatever each side has to give to make this happen. The analogy I used on Twitter today was that, the two sides, or, two parties need each other. They're always bickering. They're blaming each other. And they're making life difficult for everybody around them. It sounds like a marital TV sitcom when it's the reality, and has been for decades, between these two warring factions within the game of baseball.
Yeah, well, the first sitcom that I thought of was the Jeffersons, because George and Wheezy always seemed to just have their outs, but boy, they loved each other in the end.
Yeah, and then the long time before that, the Honeymooners.
Yeah.
That was. So that's kind of where it's at, and if there wasn't so much at stake, it would be funny. But there is an awful lot at stake, and ultimately, I hope both sides understand that.
Getting back to what you're talking about with the expanded postseason, because there's been talk about shortening up the season and expanding the playoffs for a long time, much like the NBA is thinking about flipping their schedule forever, and that's been talked about for years. But here you look at this situation where they've talked about, since Christmas Day is such a big day to them, and is almost like the unofficial start, and they would go with the NBA Finals all the way until July, which I don't necessarily think would be good for baseball. Do you think, if you think about it, do you think that baseball, maybe you look at, getting playoffs with expanded playoffs started in September if this works out?
Well, I don't think, especially after this year, that there's much of a chance of a shortened regular season. I think that the economic impact of the 2020 baseball season is something that's going to be felt for years to come. So I don't think there'll be any interest or drive to shorten the regular season and expand the playoffs with a shortened regular season. Now, one of the negotiating points currently is the expanded playoffs beyond this year into 2021 as well. Universal designated hitter is also on the table. So there's some other, I don't want to say secondary issues here, but they're trying to figure out a way to get the game on the field this year with some components of this agreement extending to next year and beyond. Of course, Derek, baseball's unique in that you've got bookends of bad weather on each end of what is already a 6-month regular season. Now that's less of an issue in Texas where the stadiums are domed, but in the upper Midwest, you've got 10 teams in this region, and Milwaukee's the only one that has a domed ballpark. So you've got to be careful about extending either the regular season too early into March. We've already done that, or having the regular season and postseason extend into November. We've already done that. It's NBA can play 12 months out of the year. The NHL can do it. Football probably would if it could, but baseball's got the issue of weather on the front and back end of its regular seasons already.
Yeah, no question about that. You mentioned, I saw that they're having graduations in the new Texas Rangers ballpark yesterday, so with a lot of spacing. It's really, I feel bad for them just in the fact that they had this big grand opening, and it's to say it's a soft opening would be an understatement.
Well, I think one of the hopes and yet one of the concerns is the transition that might occur once this hoped-for season actually starts, that by the end of it, some fans will be allowed into the ballparks in very limited numbers, but we're socially distancing now in stores and restaurants and all that. It's conceivable that you could do that in a ballpark and have, maybe 1,000 fans. I don't know, instead of 35,000, but you might be able to sell 1,000 tickets. And that might help relieve some of the financial distress that the owners think they're going to be going through this year.
Well, it certainly would help the ambiance too, and that would help out a lot. It will be interesting. I think the biggest thing that's going to be curious is expanded playoffs and more revenue. Could that be that? I think that's going to tell a lot of stuff too, because who knows what the revenue pie is going to be before it's all said and done. Hopefully they can figure that out. Well, speaking of revenue, I know that I've seen more and more people walking around with Game Used, your book, so that's a good sign as things are opening up and bookstores are open up. And I literally have a few stitches left to finish this up. Hopefully I'll do this weekend. Weather, and then, of course, we had a little situation this past 2 weekends ago with everything. I didn't get a chance to finish it up, but I'm sure that's going pretty brisk for you right now.
Well, the book itself was sent off a few weeks ago for its second printing, and so that's encouraging. And again, the idea is for the book was for it to be a Twins history book of the first 60 years through the 2019 season, and regardless of what 2020 is going to look like, hopefully readers will enjoy the Twins history that's included in the book from the perspective of a little kid who literally followed the team since day one in 1961 up through the championship celebration of 2019. So we'll hope that we'll have a season in 2020, and that it'll be the book will be a nice complement to what we hope will be a successful year on the field for the Twins.
Well, you certainly can't say, you wish you could have waited another year to add anything to it because there's nothing really to talk about. So this, as far as that's concerned, it kind of fit anyway. If you want to follow baseball and the history of it, it's a good book to pick up, Game Used with Dick Bremer. Dick, we'll talk again next week, and hopefully, I'm not going to say this ever again, hopefully we have better news next week.
Yeah, it'd be nice to eventually be able to have games and home runs and double plays to talk about instead of labor relations. So hopefully we'll get there sooner rather than later, Derek.
You bet. Thanks so much for being with us again. Dick Bremer with us for the Twins Wrap, brought to you by Jefferson Lines. We do it each and every Tuesday, 5:45, starting with the Drive Time News Hour and finishing up right here on Couch Potato Radio. Twins Classic Radio coming up as we finish out our blast into June here with the Bomba Squad, and what a great game this was. It was the second game of a day-night doubleheader, and pretty much solidified the American League Central title for the Minnesota Twins last year. That is coming up for you shortly. This has been Couch Potato Radio. Derek Hanson with you on the mighty 790 KFGO.